Hey guys, in today's video I bring you a chilling story. Callista Faye Ashford, a skeptical teacher, died and was taken to heaven, where she met Jesus and discovered surprising truths that defy everything religions teach. What she saw and experienced will transform her view of life and eternity. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss this incredible revelation. Let's get started. My name is Callista Faye Ashford. I'm 42 years old and I'm a science teacher in Asheville, North Carolina. Before my near-death experience, my life was peaceful but very science-oriented. I have always been a skeptical woman, firmly believing that everything in the world could be explained through rational evidence and natural laws. For me, life was a logical sequence of events, and death was just the definitive end. There was no room for spiritual beliefs, much less any idea of a heaven or afterlife. I considered myself a practical person, always looking for scientific answers to the questions that arose. Physics, biology, and chemistry were my world, and supernatural explanations were completely beyond my reach. I often looked at the people around me with a certain curiosity, but a little contempt, when they talked about their religious beliefs. I thought these things were simple escapism or easy answers to life's complicated questions. My routine revolved around my career. I was a respected teacher, dedicated to my work and my students. I took care of myself, doing physical exercises to keep my body in good shape, but always with a mind focused on the logical, the tangible. Nothing in my life seemed to indicate that anything extraordinary or spiritual would happen to me. I was comfortable in my controlled, predictable world. However, something inside me, even if I didn't know it, was about to change. Everything I believed about life and death was challenged that day when my heart stopped beating. I didn't know it at the time, but my journey was about to take me to a place beyond reason and logic, to a world I had never considered real. I was about to undergo the most transformative experience of my life, an experience that would change my view of the universe, death, and the very meaning of existence. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind of day when the sun shines softly, the streets are empty, and the cool air brings relief from the early heat of summer. I used to run on Saturday mornings to stay active, mainly because exercise has always been an important part of my routine. That morning, I was particularly excited, feeling more energetic than usual. I was trying to improve my time and wanted to challenge myself. As always, I put on my headphones, turned on my playlist, and headed out for my usual route through the quiet streets of Asheville. The pace of the run calmed me, and I felt the wind on my face as my feet hit the asphalt. I was immersed in the moment, not paying much attention to my surroundings, as if each step was a meditation. I was alone, with no one to accompany me, just the sound of music and the sound of my steps. However, everything suddenly changed. A deep, sharp pain shot through my chest, something so intense it made me stop instantly. It was as if an unbearable weight had been placed on my heart. I tried to take deep breaths, but the pain was overwhelming. My first instinct was to try to continue, thinking it was something temporary, but I soon realized that I could no longer breathe normally. My chest felt tight, and a dizzy feeling began to wash over me. It hit me. Something was very wrong. I sat on the floor, trying to stay calm, but the pain kept increasing. I remember looking around, hoping to see someone, but the street was empty. I couldn't understand what was happening. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to focus on my breathing, but I soon realized that my vision was blurring, as if the world was distorting. That's when I heard a familiar voice. The sound of hurried footsteps. Peter, my neighbor, appeared next to me, running towards me. He crouched down and asked if I was okay, but my response was a faint whisper, my voice already becoming a mix of fear and confusion. Before I could react, he grabbed his phone and called the paramedics. I was panicking, but at the same time, a sense of calm began to wash over me. As if the fear was dissipating, my vision began to slowly fade. I knew something very serious was happening, but strangely I didn't feel like it was the end. There was a feeling of disconnection, as if my body was no longer mine, and a peace invaded my being, despite the chaotic situation. When the paramedics arrived, I was no longer conscious. All I was left with were flashes of distant sounds and lights. I didn't know it at the time, but my heart had stopped. I was clinically dead. The first thing that caught my attention when I woke up was the silence. It was a deep, total silence, as if the world around me had completely disappeared. I couldn't hear the sound of my breathing. nor the beating of my heart, which I now knew had stopped. The feeling was strange and disconcerting, but at the same time comforting. I was no longer trapped by that intense pain in my chest, nor by the weight of anxiety. I felt light, free, as if I were floating. I was somewhere, but I couldn't pinpoint where. My perception of space felt distorted, as if the reality around me was more fluid, less concrete. I looked down and saw my body, lying on the asphalt, surrounded by paramedics and Peter. They were trying to revive him, but there was no longer any connection between my body and my consciousness. I watched them from a strange distance, as if I were a spectator, a formless observer. I felt neither fear nor confusion. I wasn't scared, as I would have imagined. On the contrary, there was absolute peace, as if everything was in the right place. I was no longer tied to the limitations of my physical body. The suffering and pain had disappeared, and I was in a state of pure observation, without the need to understand what was happening. I was out of my mind, literally. I noticed the paramedics, their muffled voices, their quick and precise hands trying to restore life to my body. But, strangely enough, I no longer cared about what happened there. It was as if time was flowing in a different way. I knew that something extraordinary was about to happen, that I was being guided towards something greater, and this gave me an immense feeling of serenity. I began to notice a presence. It wasn't something physical, but a feeling of strength, of light, something welcoming and powerful. It wasn't a person, but it was as if all the energy in the universe was concentrated in one direction, calling me there. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew it was the next step, that I was being pulled by something bigger than myself. That was when an intense light appeared before me. It was not an ordinary light, but a living, pulsating light, full of energy. It didn't overshadow, but it filled the space in a way I can't describe in words. It was more than just light. It was a presence, a force that seemed to envelope me in a gentle but irresistible way. This light was so welcoming that I couldn't resist. I was drawn to it without question, as if it were my destiny, as if it were my home. As my soul moved toward the light, I began to feel a deep sense of relief. Everything around me seemed to disappear, and I was going to a place beyond all understanding. And then, without knowing what would come next, I felt completely at ease, without fears, without worries, like I'm finally home. The light continued to surround me as I floated towards it. It was brighter than anything I had ever seen, but at the same time it wasn't aggressive or uncomfortable. It was warm and welcoming, like a hug. I felt completely enveloped by her, as if I were being carried to a place I already knew but had forgotten. As I got closer, I realized that this light was not just a visual thing. It was as if she had a presence of her own, a consciousness. I could feel that she was alive, pulsing with an energy that seemed to communicate directly with my soul. Without words, without sounds, the light said, "You are safe. Come." My physical body felt distant, almost like a thought I had left behind. The weight of my life on earth, the doubts, the fears, the responsibilities, all of it was gone. It was as if I had been freed from all the ties that tied me to my existence. The lightness I felt was indescribable, and the light seemed to amplify it, removing any trace of pain or anxiety. As I moved forward, I began to notice that the space around me was changing. I didn't know if I was in a tunnel or an infinite void, but there was a feeling of movement, as if I were being carried by an invisible current. Time, as we know it, did not exist there. There were no minutes or seconds, just an expanding continuity. Then, suddenly, I heard a sound. It wasn't an ordinary sound, but something that seemed to resonate within me, like a song I'd never heard but felt incredibly familiar. It was soft but powerful, and it filled all the space around me. This melody seemed to come from light itself, and it touched something deep inside me, as if it were awakening a forgotten memory. At that moment, I realized I was not alone. There was a presence in the light, something or someone that watched me with a gentle but firm intensity. This presence seemed to know me deeply, more than I knew myself. Without a word being spoken, I felt like I was being called not just into the light, but into something greater, something that would forever change who I was. Finally, the light began to expand, revealing something beyond it. I could see the outline of a figure, a silhouette that glowed with an indescribable intensity. It wasn't just a physical form, It was a manifestation of love and power. Deep in my soul, I knew who I was. I didn't need introductions or explanations. It was Jesus. He was there, waiting for me. His gaze radiated something I had never experienced before, a love so pure and unconditional, it made me want to fall to my knees. Without words, he welcomed me with a peace that transcended anything I could imagine. Everything I was, everything I believed or doubted, disappeared in that instant. Before him, I was just a soul, completely open and vulnerable. I knew I was about to receive something extraordinary, something that would change not just my life, but my entire outlook on what it means to exist. When the figure fully emerged from the light, everything around me seemed to transform. Jesus was before me, but he was not like the images I had seen in books or pictures. There was no fixed face that I could accurately describe, but at the same time, I knew it was him. His presence was unmistakable. He radiated a warm, golden light, and the love that emanated from him was so intense that it seemed to encompass everything around me. I didn't know how to react. My skeptical mind searched for some logical explanation, but there, at that moment, there was no room for logic. All I felt was a love so absolute and unconditional that it made me cry, even though I didn't have a physical body to produce tears. I was faced with a truth greater than anything I could comprehend, and that truth was living, personal, divine. Jesus did not speak in words at first, but his message was clear. It was as if he was communicating directly with my soul, transmitting feelings, certainty, and a peace that I had never experienced before. He knew everything about me, every thought, every doubt, every mistake, and yet, the love he showed for me was immeasurable, as if nothing I had done could diminish the value I had for him. Finally, he spoke. His voice was like a calm river, deep and full of wisdom. She wasn't loud or authoritarian, but she carried a power that crossed any barrier. "Callista," he said, pronouncing my name as if it were the most precious word there was. "It's not your time yet." I wanted to protest. I wanted to ask why he was there, why I was there, and why something so extraordinary was happening to me. But before I could ask any questions, he continued, "I will allow you to see heaven. I want you to know the truth, so that you can return and share it. There are many who do not understand what lies beyond, but you were chosen to carry this message." As he spoke, I felt an immense weight. I didn't understand why I had been chosen. I wasn't a special person. I have always been a skeptic, someone who questioned the very idea of God. But at that moment, I realized it wasn't about merit. It was about purpose. There was something I needed to do, something he entrusted to me. He extended his hand, inviting me to follow him. Not physically, there was no body in that place, but the sensation was as real as the touch of a human hand. Without hesitation, I moved toward him. I didn't know where he would take me, but I trusted him completely. There was no room for doubt there. Your presence was the only reassurance I needed. When Jesus began to guide me, I felt like I was being transported into something beyond any human understanding. What I was about to see would change not only my outlook on death, but on life itself. I knew what was in front of me was extraordinary, something I could never fully explain, but that I would live intensely. When Jesus began to lead me, everything around me changed. Space seemed to expand infinitely, as if I were being taken to a new plane of existence. There was no ground beneath my feet, but I didn't need one. The environment was like a mixture of vivid lights and colors that went beyond the spectrum we know on Earth. Everything was so vibrant, so pulsating, that I felt like I was inside a living work of art. Then something surprising came up. I saw a horizon, but it was not an earthly horizon. It was a place that seemed like a mix of city, garden, and universe. Every element seemed to be in perfect harmony, as if all of creation had found its ideal place. Jesus looked at me with a serene smile and said, "This is heaven." I froze, not out of fear, but out of pure admiration. Heaven was completely different from any image I had imagined or that religions described. It was not a place of passive rest or of clouds and harps. It was a vibrant realm of activity, full of life, energy, and purpose. The people I saw there weren't just floating spirits. They had bodies, perfect, radiant bodies, without any of the physical limitations we know on Earth. Each one seemed to be the best version of themselves, full of health, vitality, and joy. They were busy, but not in a stressful or forced way. Some built incredibly detailed buildings. Others cultivated gardens that seemed to sing. Everything they did was an expression of who they were, as if their souls were manifesting their eternal purpose. Jesus explained to me that these souls had not lost their individuality, but, on the contrary, had amplified it. Every talent, passion, and unique trait was preserved and transformed into something greater. There, people were free to create, explore, and grow forever, without limits. Here, creativity is an expression of God's love, Jesus said. In heaven, you don't just rest, you live fully, in ways you can't even imagine on earth. He showed me fields where humans and animals lived together in perfect harmony. Wolves ran alongside sheep, birds danced around people, and even the wildest creatures were gentle and peaceful. Everything there seemed connected by an energy of love and mutual respect. The most shocking insight came when Jesus revealed that everything in heaven, every city, every mountain, every star, was, in part, shaped by the souls who lived there. It was not something fixed or static, but an ever-expanding kingdom, created in partnership with God. As he spoke, I felt a weight in his gaze, as if he wanted me to understand something deeply. Heaven is not just a place you go, he said. It is a reflection of God's love and purpose. Everything here grows, because love never stops growing. I was amazed, speechless. Every bit of what he showed challenged everything I had believed, and yet it all made sense, as if my soul had always known this truth, but was only now reminded. As Jesus continued to show me heaven, I began to understand an even deeper and more unexpected truth. This kingdom was not static. It was not a fixed, immobile, or closed place. On the contrary, it was constantly expanding, like a divine work of art in eternal construction. Each soul that arrived in heaven contributed to its evolution, bringing something unique, like a brushstroke on an infinite canvas. Jesus stopped at a high point, from where we could observe vast landscapes that seemed to stretch on forever. He pointed to a bunch of mountains that glowed with shades of gold and blue. The mountains were surrounded by rivers of liquid light that flowed as if they were made of stars. These mountains, he explained, were shaped by the imaginations of souls who found their purpose here. Each new soul brings a piece of the puzzle that God is creating. I asked, without even needing words, if this meant that heaven was growing, changing, adapting. Yes, Jesus replied with a gentle smile. Heaven reflects God's love, and love never stops growing. Just as souls never stop exploring, creating, and becoming more fully who they are. He took me to a field where some people were working together to create something that looked like a garden, but was much more than that. The flowers they planted glowed like little galaxies, changing shape and color as they grew. Every touch, every idea, contributed to transforming that space into something new. I saw souls creating not just things, but also experiences. Some seemed to be drawing entire universes, shaping constellations and planetary systems with their imagination. Others explored places so deep and complex that I could barely understand what I was seeing. Each soul was completely immersed in its purpose, and at the same time, they all worked in harmony, as parts of a great whole. Jesus then placed his hand on my shoulder, and his words were engraved on me forever. Callista, heaven is not a place of solitude or uniformity. It is where individuality is preserved and expanded. Here, you don't lose who you are. You become fully who God created you to be. I was struck by the depth of this truth. I always imagined heaven as a place where everyone was equal, but there I realized it was the opposite. Each soul brought something irreplaceable, something that was part of God's greater plan, and yet there was unity, a connection that transcended human understanding. Jesus showed me that just as heaven is constantly expanding, God's own love is always pouring out in new forms, creating new worlds, new possibilities, and new ways for us to connect with Him. At the end of that moment, I felt a joy so pure and complete that it seemed impossible to contain. It was as if my soul had opened up to a new universe of possibilities. At that moment, I realized that heaven was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of something infinitely greater. As Jesus led me to another area of heaven, something even more surprising awaited me. He took me to a vast field that seemed endless, teeming with life. Luminous flowers danced in the wind, immense trees with shining leaves exuded indescribable fragrances, and streams of crystal-clear water meandered between gentle hills. But what impressed me most was the presence of countless animals, all living in perfect harmony with human souls. I saw lions lying next to lambs, exotic birds landing on people's shoulders, and even creatures I had never seen before, as if they were animals from other worlds, so beautiful and unique that I couldn't find words to describe them. There was a sense of unity there that was beyond what we can imagine on earth. In heaven, Jesus said, all creation is reconciled. There is no fear. There are no predators. There are no victims. All forms of life coexist in perfect peace, because here everything reflects the love of God. I watched as a girl ran with a pack of wolves, her laughter echoing across the field. There was no danger, only joy. In another corner, an elderly man stroked the nose of a large tiger, while a group of colorful birds sang around him. It was as if every barrier separating humans and animals on earth had been removed, replaced with a pure, heartfelt connection. Then Jesus led me into an even more intimate space. There, I could feel something beyond the environment, a presence that was immense but also close. It was as if the entire essence of heaven emanated from an invisible but undeniably present source. Here, no one is far from God, Jesus explained. You can feel His presence in every breath, in every thought, in every movement. There are no intermediaries. There are no barriers. God is directly accessible to every soul. I couldn't see God the way I saw Jesus, but I felt His presence so intensely that it seemed to fill every part of me. It was as if an inner light had been turned on, a connection I never imagined possible. It wasn't just something I experienced. It was something that transformed me, Jesus continued. On earth, many believe that they need rituals or figures to mediate their relationship with God. Here, you realize that God has always been near, waiting for you. In heaven, this truth is lived fully. This direct connection was both humbling and liberating. I realized that all things, heaven, earth, animals, souls, were linked by an infinite love that emanated from God. It was not something distant or intangible, but something real, personal, and deeply transformative. At the end of this revelation, I felt a peace that I had never experienced before. Everything made sense. All creation, each being, was there for a purpose, to reflect and share God's love. In heaven, every barrier was undone, every distance was erased, and every soul, human or not, was connected to the Creator. As I took it all in, Jesus looked at me with a gaze that seemed to penetrate to the very essence of my soul. I knew there was more to learn, more to see, but I already felt that my view of life, both on earth and beyond, would never be the same. When Jesus led me back to the central light, I felt a mixture of emotions that I could barely contain. On the one hand, I wanted to stay in that place forever, immersed in the peace, love, and harmony that heaven offered. On the other, there was a growing heaviness in my heart, a feeling that there was still something to be done on earth, something I needed to complete. Jesus looked at me with an expression of love and seriousness. He knew what I was thinking before I even formulated the words. Callista, you saw the truth, but your mission is not over yet. You should go back and share what you learned. Many are waiting for this message, even if they don't know it. I wanted to argue, to beg to stay, but there was no room for protest. The decision was not something imposed. It was something I felt deep inside me, as if it was already engraved in my soul before I even got there. It was the mission I had been created for, and now I understood it. Jesus approached and placed his hand on what appeared to be my spiritual shoulder. An indescribable heat coursed through my being. It was as if every doubt, every fear was dissolved in a sea of certainty. Trust me, he said. What you experienced here will be a light for many. Your journey is not over yet. Suddenly, I felt a pull, not physical, but an irresistible force that began to pull me away from my heavenly surroundings. The light around me began to slowly dissipate, and the peace was replaced by a strange mix of discomfort and urgency. I was being taken back, as if I were slipping through invisible layers of reality. As I returned, I saw flashes of my body. There he was, surrounded by paramedics and with Peter watching in the background, clearly shaken. The feeling of lightness was replaced by a heaviness, and the sound began to return, first as a distant whisper, then growing in intensity. "We're losing her," shouted one of the paramedics. The words sounded clear, cutting through the fog that surrounded me. In the next instant, I felt an impact on my chest, Severe pain exploded, and the sound of a defibrillator echoed in my ears. My heart had started beating again. I opened my eyes with difficulty, blinking against the bright lights of the medical equipment. The world seemed like a blur, full of voices and hurried movements. I was back, but my mind was still partly in that other place. The sensation of Jesus' presence and heavenly light still burned in my memory, as vivid as the moment I experienced it. I knew nothing would ever be the same. What I had seen and felt in heaven was not something I could ignore or keep to myself. That was my new reality, and the mission Jesus had given me was now the center of my existence. When I woke up in the hospital, everything seemed different. The white walls, the monitoring devices, the voices around me. It was as if I was seeing everything for the first time, with eyes that finally saw what had previously been unperceivable. My body was weak, but my soul was filled with renewed energy, as if it had been replenished by something much larger than myself. My first memory was the presence of Jesus and the words he had said to me, "Your journey is not over yet. You must share what you saw." These words echoed in my mind, repeating themselves like a mantra. I knew that my life had changed forever and that I now carried a purpose I had never imagined. Over the next few days, as I recovered, I reflected deeply on everything that had happened. Before this experience, I was a skeptical science teacher, someone who lived in search of concrete, tangible answers. Now, I knew that some truths transcend logic, and that there are realities that science can never fully explain. I also realized that I couldn't keep this experience to myself. The heaven Jesus showed me was more real, more dynamic, and grander than any description I had ever encountered. It was not just a place of rest or contemplation, but a realm of creativity, expansion, and direct connection with God. It was something I needed to share with the world, even though people might doubt or reject what I had to say. My first conversation was with William, my husband. He entered the hospital room, visibly relieved to see me awake. But his expression changed when I began to relate what had happened while I was clinically dead. "William," I said, my voice still weak, "I saw heaven. I saw Jesus. And he showed me that everything we believe about life after death is far from the truth." He looked at me with concern, but also with curiosity. "Callista, you went through something traumatic. Maybe your brain was—" "No," I interrupted, holding his hand. "It was not a dream nor a hallucination. It was real. I was there. I felt it. And I know I came back for a reason." William didn't respond immediately. He just shook my hand and nodded, even though he didn't fully understand. It was the beginning of a long process of acceptance, not just for him, but for everyone who would hear my story. After leaving the hospital, I began sharing my experience with friends, family, and even strangers. Many were skeptical, but some, especially those who were grieving or seeking answers, seemed deeply moved by what I was telling them. I saw something in their eyes that I didn't understand before, a search for purpose, for meaning, that my story could help illuminate. Today, my mission is clear: to show people that heaven is not just a distant or symbolic concept. It is real, dynamic, and accessible to everyone who seeks a relationship with God. I want people to know that they don't have to wait for a near-death experience to discover this truth. God's love is available now, and He calls us to live with purpose, gratitude, and faith. As I share my story, a quote from Jesus stays with me. "Heaven reflects God's love, and love never stops growing." This is the message I want to take to the world, a message of hope, transformation, and eternal life. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.